My lecture today, ideally, assuming everything continues as it is now, is about a theory of perception and action for all organisms. And I'd like to raise the issue of what kind of science is entailed by that demand. On the screen, you see the current comprehension of the number of kingdoms that comprise our planet. Going from the bottom, bacteria, to Protoctista, to fungi, to plantae, to animalia. All of these creatures exhibit perception action. And as identified by the Mobius diagram, perception action is constituted by continuously related dual aspects of the same event. There is never any separation. There's no stimulus, no response. They're not successive things. They're captured that way sometimes incorrectly in the laboratory. These are continuous and conflated, confluent enterprises. And all of these biological systems, whether they simply move or they grow or they spread, are entities which have agency. And this term, I believe, is a very important term for us to appreciate. The agency in question is typically expressed, as I will argue, by functionally specific variability. They make their adjustments befitting their circumstances. They exhibit the ability to vary the means to achieve the ends. This runs across all 5 kingdoms. The theory of perception and action we need is not the one that simply applies to the odd human, sophisticated Europeans and Americans, but rather to the miserable creatures that make up the planet. Let's turn to Darwin's earthworms, and I wish that you would appreciate that this word awareness, in modern psychology the word consciousness is used a lot. I find this word not very helpful. When we use words, we like to see if we can tag the piece of nature to which the word refers. So what does the word awareness refer to? And I will follow Ed Reed, a student of Darwin and an ecological scientist, in saying that it refers to functionally specific variability. So here's Darwin's great experiments on worms. And I love the earthworm. The earthworm is absent sensory organs. It has no discernible brain. Very important. Let's see what it does. It plugs its burrow with leaves. These are experiments by Mr. Darwin, 1881. Plugs its burrows with leaves. It pulls them by the narrow end. So it finds them, it goes out and finds them, pulls them in, and to fit them, you have to rotate them. Pull them in by their pointed ends. So its body goes across and it rotates and pulls in. It's selective of the leaves. They have to have the right substance, right texture. But it's not selective when the air is moist and warm. Doesn't need to be. Mr. Darwin would put in his experiments just pieces of paper of different kinds, different texture, different sizes, tear them up, throw them near the burrow. And the worms would then simply elect pieces of paper, pieces of cardboard that were right. And look at the invariant here. Persistent constraint on whatever they do is the size of the pieces relative to the burrow exit. This is entrance or exit. Has to come in, has to go out. But the worm makes its choice when it's outside the burrow. No brain, no discernible sense organs, not of the kind we're used to seeing. And if there are no leaves available in its natural habitat, then, as Mr. Darwin pointed out, it just uses stones. Goes and finds pebbles, different sizes, different kind, and does what it does. And here's the story, right? It's aware of things that afford plugging and lining the burrow. And here's Darwin. Lovely word. These damn earthworms, he says, they deserve to be called intelligent. They act in the same manner as a human would in these circumstances. So where are we? For all organisms of all 5 kingdoms. See this word? We're scientists. Our job is to take words like heat and energy and mass and all these crazy words and nail them down. That's our charge. Take the ordinary language that we use to describe the world, and nail down the terms. Awareness of, perceiving meaningful distinctions and organizing actions accordingly. All 5 species. You can trot out experiments for bacteria, for Protectista, for fungi, for plantae, for animalia, showing that line holds for all 5 kingdoms. The major desideration for the required kind of science is this: commensurability of psychology, biology, and physics. Descartes gave us the first incommensurability. He gave us the distinction between mind and matter. He wrote about it well and elegantly, thus his influence. Kant gave us a second one. The second postulate of incommensurability, that between biology and physics, and it was advanced by Boltzmann. Boltzmann, unfortunately, took thermodynamics and made it statistical mechanics, and argued that nature moves in the direction of ever-decreasing order. Thereby, biologists gave up on physics. How can this be true? Since look around you and look at processes like development, processes like the becoming a learner. You learn something. All of those are going in the opposite direction to the ill-stated nature of the second. The 2 postulates, I think, have had a profound effect. They dictate orthodox theory, and they are the grantors of how we do research on perception action. They encourage taking loans of intelligence to explain perception action. This is a great phrase for me. I like this phrase a lot. It's one that was introduced into the vocabulary of sciences by Dan Dennett. It's basically the thesis that you are not permitted to explain something intelligent by making reference to a piece of intelligence. You can't say your explanation of why is something which is just like why. You can't even say that with the brain. You can't say the explanation of why is this piece of brain which is endowed with just those properties that you wish to explain. Keeping to this rejection of loans of intelligence could be the very best thing we do. No loans of intelligence. I would like to see journals in psychology, in cognitive science, in biology, to have 1 year when no one's allowed to publish a paper where loans of intelligence are sitting inside the paper. 1 year when you're never allowed to let the organisms infer the nature of the world. 1 year. It will do wonders for science. That's my hope. Discourages, in addition, explanations from first principles. Let's have a look. What kind of science then? Let's start here. The origin and evolution of perception action is deeply and directly connected to thermodynamics. Evolution is a global phenomenon. By the 1980s, we could draw these pictures. They had been anticipated by the great Russian scholar Vernadsky, Vernadsky. My Russian around will tell me how to say it right. And he had made such pronouncements in the latter part of the 1800s, early part of the 1900s. But let's see what it is. Look at this panel A. This axis is the percentage of atmospheric oxygen. It stops at 100. So this curve is showing you the growth of atmospheric oxygen. You'll notice that the planet is 4.5 billion years old. 6 billion, not 6, by 3.8 billion, the first creatures appeared. Prokaryotes, bacteria. By this point in time, they did something amazing, right? The bacteria, what did they do? They took 2 massive energy supplies. That coming from the sun, that provided by the oceans. They took photons, and they took water, and they used the photons to split the water molecule, releasing oxygen. One of the world's greatest ever inventions by bacteria. But this oxygen had to be absorbed by iron. So nothing happens. Look at this. This is the build-up of... But to this point here, 2 billion years ago, the world was just absorbing the oxygen. And then all of a sudden, all of the metals have done their absorption. This is how we know these things. And now oxygen begins to become part of the atmosphere. As soon as it does that, look what happens. Why? Because atmospheric oxygen is a measure of distance from equilibrium, and it is an internal potential. It amplifies processes. pushing the Earth system further from equilibrium. Look at this function over here. This is the last 600,000 years. This is the growth from crustacea to primates. Become pretty late. You'll notice that what's going on is that the respiration intensity per unit mass is ratcheting up. What's this telling us? This is a measure of the dissipation of the chemical potential. Here's an argument, one that's hotly discussed at the moment in the literature. What the hell are we here for? We're here, essentially, to generate entropy. We're producers of entropy. This Earth, when it got formed, found various ways of constellating, compounding energy. These species are coming along and they're taking and they're degrading it. Degrading it. So look at this thesis being argued by Swenson in the United States and Manila in Europe. Organisms and surroundings are part of a directed single evolutionary process that produces progressively more ways and more intense ways to generate entropy. And here's this much discussed, so-called, in some quarters, law of maximum entropy production. Any source sink system, the Earth is one, will select from available intermediaries, these are available intermediaries, that intermediary or assembly of them that minimizes the potential and maximizes the entropy at the fastest rate given the opportunities or constraints. This, by the way, is just looking at the Baynard convection instability. It's already inherent. You go from a distribution of things operating at the scale of 10 to the minus 5 in space and 10 to the minus 8 in space and 10 to the minus 5 in time. And all of a sudden you have things which you can see with the naked eye. The Baynard convection instability. These cells appear and these rolls appear out of what was previously just a liquid being heated from below and cooled above. That phenomenon itself is reflecting this law, so people can now argue. What kind of science? We continue. Perception as a two-terms, one-step relation, not a three-terms, two-steps relation. Simple diagrams. I like simple diagrams. I like to say to students, use stupid diagrams. Stupid diagrams are way better and very sophisticated diagrams. Particularly if you're teaching freshman class. Stupid diagrams are excellent. The animal walks on the surface. The animal sees the surface. The proper objects of perceiving are the same as those of activity. The bacteria moves through a fluid. It sees the particular structures of the fluid. A two-term relation involving, in this case, the same surface that applies in both cases. It's a very simple piece of English, but unfortunately, this notion of direct perception is not something we've ever been able to achieve. Here's perception theory. It is a three-term relation. The animal walks on the surface, but the animal, roughly speaking, sees M. That represents the surface. We're happy here. We don't say you walk on imaginary things, this would be getting very silly, but we're allowed to say something like that here. Perceiving is a three-term relation. A third thing mediates between the animal and the world. And this is all that is meant by indirect perception. So here's James Gibson. The three-terms relation is epistemologically paradoxical. The two-terms relation is not. What kind of science is needed to get the two-terms relation? Now why should I worry? Let's go back. The five kingdoms. The two-terms relation looks exactly like what the other four kingdoms need and all those other animals other than humans. What they need to do is to be in contact with the world. No mediating terms, which then invite all other kinds of pieces of machinery, inferences and representations, abilities to do this and that, which are all intellectual with no basis for their origin. I think is the true statement. The two-terms relation is not. So I'm going to take you through something which I think is, for our present purposes, far from trivial. The strongest, the best ever three-term theory we've had is by the great 19th century scholar, truly one of the greatest scientists of all time. His fingers touched almost every branch of science. So he argued, brilliantly, How does perception work? It is a matter of unconscious inference. We now slot in the word abductive, introduced by the American scholar Charles Peirce, who used to hang out with William James, or used to be taken care of by William James. The argument is inference is from effect to cause. Look at the theory. This is the theory of perception which almost everybody adheres to. What I have in my eye is a proximal stimulus. This proximal event has been caused by something in the world. My charge is to infer from the effect to that in the world which would normally have caused it. Modern psychology likes Bayesian statistics. Bayesian statistics fits that story. It's been a paradox since the 1800s. This is a kind of argument you would find in 1800s literature. The paradox of unconscious inference. Causes and their relations to effects must be known, but they can only be known by unconscious inference. All artificial intelligence is by abduction. All robots operate by abduction. The best theories of perception, the ones we tell all our students about, are abduction, arguing from effect to cause. The issue is how do you get around this paradox? And it's turned out to be rather bad. These are important people here. Jerry Fodor, a wonderful philosopher, terribly amusing and very important. He has been a major force behind modern cognitive science. Incredible. But here he is, in year 2000, doing just what I'd hoped. Abduction is a bit of a riddle. How can abduction be mechanical, that is computationally implementable, feasible, that is constituted by modular components which are informationally encapsulated? That means they're constrained to current input and a proprietary database. They can't go anywhere. They have to work in a constrained way because otherwise computation becomes interminable. It's the modular hypothesis. You have to have modular systems. And what does it mean for abduction to be reliable? Abduction is unencapsulated because you have no a priori basis for delimiting requisite variety of knowledge. Here's my best demonstration. Turvey the robot. There I am. So I'm a robot. And I come by this place here, and as I take this step, all of a sudden I get a zap of energy. It's an effect. I must now infer its cause. I have to do abduction. What caused it? This is good. This could be good to know. What caused it? Oh, maybe it's this position of my hand. No, maybe it's the direction I'm looking. Maybe it's how I'm standing. Maybe it's my distance from this. No, maybe it's my distance from that object. Maybe it's because I came from this direction. Or maybe it's because I came through that door. Maybe it's because I'm in this room. Maybe because I'm in the state of Florida. Maybe because I caught a JetBlue to get here. No a priori constraint. Can you get robots to learn? No! You cannot get robots to learn. Someone mentioned today theories that assume innateness. Of course, that's you solve these problems by innateness. Because how else are you going to get the solution to the abduction problem? So this is quite serious, and here's Jerry Fodor. And here's Jerry Fodor. It's an argument I had with Jerry Fodor in 1975. This is delightful for me. Here's the riddle. Abduction can be mechanistic and feasible only if it's not reliable. It can be mechanistic and reliable only if it's not feasible. It can be feasible and reliable only if it's not mechanistic. Resolution. Jerry Fodor and others now. It is a case that F and R are non-negotiable. Those are non-negotiable. Therefore, not F. It's mechanically impossible. Fodor, this is wonderful. Abduction really is a terrible problem for cognitive science that is unlikely to be solved by any kind of theory we have heard so far. And I'm concerned that we don't teach our students precisely what's at issue when we tell them our theories of learning and memory and perception. What's at issue here? What's at issue is abduction. Arguing from effect to cause and all that entails. And it tells a lot. It's not implementable. It's not a theory that we can work with. The abduction problem is writ large because it's a problem about how much context you need to include to do your inferencing. How much context? So let's look at development. This is Gottlieb. Very interesting student of development. He comes from a wonderful American lineage. It began with a Chinese gentleman from Hong Kong, Kuo. And then it went to Schneerler and Lerman and to Gottlieb. It's a wonderful tradition. They simply said there is no such thing as instinct. There is no such thing as innate. You cannot offer that as a scientific starting point. Do experiments. Figure out what's going on. Find what you need to get creatures of the kind you see that already look pretty smart. So, self-organizing developmental system. It's the only one we have. Notice these particular lines. This is the genetic level, this is the neurobiological, that's the behavioral, and that's the environment. These are point-addable scales that we can worry about. They are coactive, co-equal, and co-evolving parts. Wonderful. So this is what the story looks like. And some evolutionary theorists these days say it's this thing that nature is pulling at. It's this thing that the fourth law is grabbing hold of. It's the developmental system in its entirety. Things that are still not in undergraduate textbooks, that's for sure. Something missed there, we'll go here. I'm going to show you a few experiments, because my point is I wish to show you we're dealing with the abduction problem here, the issue of context. This is a classic experiment where you take a newly hatched chicken and you prevent it from seeing its feet for 2 days. Then when you let it be normal, it does not see mealworm as something to eat. Mealworm is the innately given edible food of the chicken. Those are things they eat in any ordinary circumstances. So, don't see feet. Think of the abduction problem. Seeing feet. That's the basis of this problem. And my favorite in recent times is this one. Papers in Nature in 2003, 2005, twitching while sleeping. So don't let the mouse twitch. If you don't let the mouse twitch when it sleeps, then this is ill-formed. Connections may not occur, and you don't get this amount of sensory matter. I ask the abduction problem. There's the effect. What the hell's the cause? Who would have said twitching has anything to do with somatosensory cortex, for God's sake? So if I stop you from twitching, isn't this just maturation? Isn't it just genes telling the system what to do? Look at the diagram from Gottlieb. Coactive, co-equal, co-evolving parts. And the abduction problem, I think, is here. All experiences, and we're back to words. I love words. This word here, we do not know what this word stands for. We do not know scientifically that in nature to which this word should be the tag. We do not know. And we have much discussion about experience. But in a highly non-linear, self-organizing, dynamical system, small things can have profoundly disproportionate effects. Isn't that the mantra? Self-organizing, highly non-linear, dynamical system. Small things have, by definition, have disproportionate effects, and they have massively disproportionate effects. So all experiences can contribute. The logically major and minor, the obvious and the non-obvious. So most of the time when we're doing our science, we're pointing to the obvious. Oh, I can see personally, I'm a scientist, I can see what the divisions are. They're visible to me. I've got little templates for them. Nature doesn't care. Nature's just going about being nature. All these various influences. The non-obvious, like these. This is non-obvious. This is non-obvious. The prolonged and the instantaneous. How long does an event that you're encountering have to last to leave an impact? Go to memory theory, sometimes give you a microsecond. Sometimes it can be something that lasted a year. The recurring and the once only. Abduction problem is writ large. What kind of science? Information, this word. All right, here we go again. I love words, you have to excuse me. You did invite me here, and you are giving me some kind of liberty. So I have a certain liberty. This word is not a word whose right definition we have. Oh yes, we have a word, information. I saw it used today in 1,000 ways, not one of which was Shannon. Because none of you would use Shannon in your ordinary language about information. The Shannon is the only information theory we have. And it's the one that currently allows the world to be so technologically brilliant. It's not the term information that matters for the 5 kingdoms. So I would like to argue. Information is a law-based property of real states of affairs, not logical, not a mathematical attribution, not Shannon. So here in energy dispersals, under the first and second laws, the law of invariance, the first law, the law of change, the second law. These are information about in senses of specificity to their sources. Let's say some look. This is a mathematical statement of the optical field in front of me. If I stand like this, you see the deformation of the optical field when I'm not moving. If I move backwards first, you'll see the one there and backward. You can see what's happening to the deformation field of the optics. If I move forward, you see something different on the screen. For you as an actor, this one specifies you're standing still, this one specifies you're moving forward, this one you're backward, and this is me moving this way. These are the optical distributions that you encounter in a room, by the way, in which light is multiply scattered from non-mirror surfaces. This is man-made. Even this is texture. And the starting point for a theory of vision, some argue, is the multiply scattered light at a point of observation. At that point, it is unique and there's no ambiguity. To show you where we are, physics only started looking at the scattering of light seriously in 1980. And it's done it so far for 1 dimension and now for 2 dimensions. Look around here. Look how many surfaces there are. And the light coming from these sources is being scattered, multiply scattered, back and forth. So if you had the math on this point here, you wouldn't be looking at the theory of light that was written by Euclid. Geometric optics. That would not be what you had in your hand. You wouldn't even have the observables that we typically use in physics to express it. People have to find new qualities and quantities. That's happening. It only began in 1980. Odor plumes. Most creatures live in places where they have to rely upon odor filaments and anonymously diffusing odor filaments. This is the odor plume of a prey. If I'm the predator, that's specific to where the prey is and to the prey's nature. These plumes can extend over long periods of space, long amounts of space, and over reasonable periods of time. These are hydrodynamic vector fields. These are ways of capturing them. What do we know about them? We now know that they're specific to the movement of the thing, to the direction it's moving in, and to its kind. Hydrodynamic fields. Specificity is the word. Shannon is not a theory of specificity, but for the 5 kingdoms. If I'm some miserable little bacteria, or if I'm a fungus, and fungi do all kinds of coordinated activity. Their coordination is incredible. And they do it on the basis, we must suppose, of information about the states of affairs, coming through diffusions of chemicals, diffusions of odors, etc., etc. We know so little about these particular capabilities. Returning to the law of maximum entropy production and global evolution, coordination of organisms with lawful information about provides access to otherwise inaccessible opportunities to produce ordered flow and dissipate potentials at faster rates. This linkage of the 5 domains of nature to information about is of significance, perhaps, not to the local lives of all those creatures, but also to the way in which the planet evolved. a means of increasing the rate of entropy production. But this word aboutness, it can only be used in defined circularly. Consider pointing to where's the cat. So here I am, someone says where's the cat, and I go, that's it. Pointing finger X entails the cat, Y, on the mat, by which the finger's pointing is entailed. Okay, bear with me, I know I hate this stuff. Ghastly. Bear with me. Pointing fingers at cats and then realizing the entailment seems to run both ways. X is about Y is true, because this is what we're trying to get to. Information in this sense. If something is about something else, then you've already got meaning. You've already got meaning. All we get from the wonders of Shannon is syntax. And if you're doing cognition, your big challenge is how the hell do you get syntax and semantics together? Where's semantics coming from? Syntax we can give you. Semantics, this is very hard. Information about is intended to be already meaningful. This is specific to that which is a meaningful state of affairs. Oh, by the way, that's food. By the way, that's danger. Oh, by the way, that's a falling off place. Information about. So that's why I want to worry about it for a moment. X is about Y is true only if these two things are true. X entails Y and Y entails X. This is not how we do ordinary science. That's not how we do it. All right, that's Turvey doesn't know how to do ordinary science. Excuse me. Here's ego motion. This is me moving. I move this way. There I go. So, optical deformation X is produced by my moving forward, and so this entails that I'm doing that. Sorry, excuse me. Disney knows that if I produce this for you, you'll experience that. And he knows that, so he runs his big things in Disney. Produces his big displays, and you have to be strapped into your seat because you are feeling yourself moving forward or moving backward or moving to the side. He knows that. So this entails that I'm doing that, but me doing that entails this. Back to Immanuel Kant. Two physics. No one ever described the two physics as good as he, and I wish to use him to get to this aboutness problem. Two entailments. This is his great work in the Critique of Judgment. This is the known physics, the one given to us by Newton, being worked on by Laplace around about this time. The known physics. Look how he expresses it. It's a physics of machines. Parts exist, but not by means of each other. Parts act together to meet the thing's purpose. But their actions have nothing to do with the thing's construction. Airplanes, clocks. But over here, the unknown physics. The physics of animals and plants. Kant's great question. Where is the Newton of the blade of grass? Isn't that wonderful? Where is the Newton of the blade of the grass? Because his physics is different. Look at it. The parts are both causes and effects of the thing, both means and ends. The parts act together, but also construct and maintain themselves as whole. These are so far apart, these are so different, that this gave to the transcendental mind, and this is proof of God. Look at the screen. The words are perfect. This is the theoretical biologist, Robert Rosen. Robert Rosen added two lines to this. This is open to efficient cause. This is closed to efficient cause. Being closed to efficient cause is a statement about what it means to be a self-organizing system. And you're going to see it becomes a statement as to what it means to be complex. If I can get to that, then I can get to this in this particular issue of entailment that we're calling living things are not machines. So what kind of science? Here we go. Impredicative entailments. I want you to look at the white arrows. The white arrows were ruled out by Bertrand Russell, Hilbert, and Poincaré in the early part of the 1900s. Look how dangerous the white arrows are. That means the following. You use context to define system. You use system to define subsystems. You use the whole to define function. You use function to define parts. That's called the impredicative direction of definition. The impredicative. The word impredicative was handed to Russell by Poincaré. As they were struggling with this, it's not trivial to you. This is amazingly important. Getting rid of the impredicative was terribly important. We would not have had Turing. There would have been no Turing. There would have been no computers. Getting rid of impredicative means you get rid of circularity, get rid of ambiguity. So what is it? What is defined participates in its own definition, for God's sake. For God's sake. You learn at school not to allow such things to happen. Its behaviors, the system, its behaviors, its functions are referred to larger systems rather than to subsystems. Here's the arrow we know. This is the arrow we know. This one. Subsystems in their collection define systems. Parts define function. We go that way. The arrow runs in the thin black arrow direction. This is ordinary science. But here's Robert Rosen and others. The system is complex when it contains irremovable impredicativities. Here's Gödel's incompleteness theorem. We've had many debates about it. Many philosophers and psychologists and others say it tells us about the limit of the human mind. And Robert Rosen says rubbish. What it tells you about is what it tells you about. When Gödel was doing this, establishing the incompleteness theorem, he was working through the arithmetic in order to get rid of, in its proof, circularity. And he couldn't. He was trying to build up a means of getting rid of paradoxes. He couldn't. He couldn't do it. He could not get rid of the impredicative statements where, see, this is the problem. What is defined participates in its own definition. Pick up your math book, you go through, you have many of these. And he went through meticulously, developed the particular numbering system that again gave us a step up on modern computers. A lot happens with regard to this predicative versus impredicative issue. But here's Rosen. The system is complex when it contains irremovable impredicative. You cannot get rid of them. And in modern times, we now express impredicativities through non-well-founded set theory. Something happened in the 1980s. As it had happened in the 1800s. In the 1800s, we said, what about the fifth postulate of Euclid's geometry? It doesn't fit the other postulates. What happens if you change it? So they did. It caused a furor. It was known as the crisis in mathematics. It caused uproar. The fifth postulate, the parallel postulate. Let's just change it. The young people who tried to do that couldn't get published. Lobachevsky could not get published. Gauss, the editor of the major editor in mathematics, stopped it. And Gauss actually knew. He already had the inkling of what would happen. He already had the inkling. Lobachevsky, Riemann. These people began to push differences. They just said, oh, just imagine it's not that. Just imagine this, imagine that. And as they imagined, then new geometries appeared. Einstein used a couple of them to give us the special theory of relativity. Those stupid teenagers trying to rewrite the fifth postulate, right? Those miserable people who couldn't get published. Miserable little blighters. What was the important thing about that particular effort with regard to the changes here? So here in 1980, people started to say, do we need sets to exclude themselves? And some mathematicians said no. And what opens up then is a means of dealing with natural language, because it has ambiguities, and to deal with natural systems which have self-referring properties. This is a new direction for the modern century. What kind of science? Still going, bear with me. Environments of all organisms cannot be defined as the classical way we do in university philosophy departments. and the way in which we build up our mathematics. Because they don't suit, by this argument, the other members of the planet. It doesn't hold for all 5 kingdoms. It doesn't make much sense. What they perceive are the possibilities for doing, possibilities for action. And it's this definition that matters. Let's have a look at it. Suppose I am a behavioral ecologist. My job is to figure out what constitutes something like a perch for the lizard. What constitutes a perch for a lizard? And trying to find out what these things are is not so straightforward. Well, it has to be view-fromable. Okay, I have to be able to stand up and see where my prey is. It has to be jump-offable with accuracy. It has to be sprint-onable with maximal speed, both to catch my prey and to escape my predators. And if you try to understand what this property is, think of it, I'm analyst. I'm walking around saying, I'm looking for a perch. What's really a perch? Oh, this is it, right? This is the perch. If I had good knees, I'd jump up here. I used to demonstrate gates, quadruped gates, on tables when I was younger. My wife said not to do that. Move on, move on. So look at this. What kind of function is this? And when you look at efforts to identify what an organism takes as a place to do something, you're into what I say, German words. German is a great language, right? Just keep adding words to words, and you've got one. It's wonderful. And these are German words. Oh, it's a place that's view-fromable, jump-offable with accuracy, sprint-onable with maximum speed, and it's a function of your legs, knee legs, my legs, and the texture and breadth of the bark. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Very helpful. Imagine building a logic structure in ordinary philosophy departments from these things. Straightforward. A limpet's predator. So here's a limpet. You live close to the Atlantic, you see these things. So limpets escape from sea snails and starfish. Well, they do so when their size relative to their predator's size is not so great. But when their size is a little bigger than it was before, slightly bigger relative to predator size, then they continue they attack the snail, but continue to escape the starfish. And at some point, this is true, they'll attack both snail and starfish. What is a predator for a limpet? What is a predator for a limpet? It knows. You could also ask, how does it know? It's not doing shambling. It's not doing inference. It must be something about the particular diffusion of pressure waves and odor plumes that are specifying this is, for me, a retreat-fromable creature, or this is, for me, an approach and attack. Now, something a little harder. So here we go. What are these things? See this here? I'm going to jump a little bit. What are those things? Affordances. What are they? How do we lay hold of them? What kind of entity is this? Now, stop for a moment. Here I'm arguing that we're trying now to do the ontology for the 5 kingdoms. What's the right way of describing the world for biology in terms of possibilities for action? So let's go further. This post, you can see here in this picture there's a squirrel and a mouse. The post is jump up-onable for the squirrel, but not for the mouse. It's not a jump up-onable thing. I come along, I don't jump on it, but if it's something lower, you may see me do a little leap. The squirrel is fine. It's walk-roundable for both of them, and it is pass-throughable for neither. The words, all the words are action-related words. What kind of property is it? So this is a primary predicative property. This height is obtained by relationship to this ruler. Now we're dealing with another kind of problem. The ones that have buggered us up for centuries. Secondary qualities in philosophy, psychology, and biology. The secondary qualities that when Newton and Galileo were building our physics, they ruled them out as being part of physics. They're not included. That's why they call it secondary qualities. They're pushed from then on by all major philosophers of perception. Our theory is of mass and distance and time. A brilliant book. It needed to be made. But it rules out a whole bunch of nature. the secondary quantities. And now look at the secondary quantities. This is a relational property. It's impredicative. To identify jump unable for this creature, you have to include the creature. It's as if when I'm perceiving that. I'm perceiving this system. Me and it. Don't take the picture too seriously. But the information about is about that object relative to me with respect to jumping up upon it. Affordances are objective, real, and physical. But in what sense? What are we after here? What kind of science do we need to handle these sorts of problems? Well, we can see that it's impredicative. But I'm also willing to argue it's quantum compatible. Because the issues of quantum theory are these issues. These are quantum theory issues. That's why people for a while were grabbing quantum logic and they didn't know what to do with it. They're sort of now circling around the old quantum logic. Because what it's trying to do is express things more generically. What kind of problems showed up in the early 1900s that we gave the title quantum theory to? Problems like this. Problems rampant with impredicativities. What kind of science? Information about and energy for as reciprocal aspects of nature. Look at the dragonfly. It's going to catch an ideally, there's a, I almost fell over something. My wife didn't see that, it's good. There's an insect up here, and the dragonfly has to see. This is an opening, this is a barrier. When to swerve, how much torque to apply. Is that thing edible? How far away is it? What's the time to contact? Is it a dragonfly? Just going about everyday business. To see direction to contact, it's to see torque to contact. Right, what's going on here? I worry about these. You guys, I worry about these. I watch flies, I watch insects, I walk around the woods wondering how any of these things can do anything they do. Do you look at what they're doing, for God's sake? Perceiving an opening when I'm flying with my wings like this. Bats and dragonflies perceive openings with respect to their wingspan. They just do it. Now, if I'm going to catch something, then I have to create a torque. That means information about that thing and torque. They're going to sit there inferring, oh, I see. This thing is in these coordinates, now I'm going to do this and that, and I'm going to produce this. I think not. I think nature is way beyond some of these measures. All of this, if you can see this, I think this says, how is information... No, I'm going to be clever. I'm not. No, I'm not. Oh, they don't move. Oh, yeah. How is information...
That is detected.
That is detected.
Thank you. How is information about that is detected related to the energy that is controlled? So look at the requirement. Information about and energy for as reciprocal aspects of nature. For all of the five kingdoms, there's some deep linkage between information about and energy for control. Watch yourselves today, all the little bits and pieces of movement you're doing, requiring all the right kinds of energy, all the right kinds of torque, all the right kinds of forces. We currently argue you use inverse Newton. We also currently argue you use inverse optics. To get robots to do these things, we give them inverse Newton. Give them Newton's equations and all that that entails. We give them the optics, the theory of optics, and all that that entails. In order to get them to see okay, in order to get them to move okay. What kind of science? So this is the dragonfly again, or any other such creature. Perception action we're going to, I think, have to consider is a gauge invariant. Gauge invariance takes the global symmetry and expresses it locally. So look at this dragonfly. What does it have to do? It's intent. Here I am. I'm going for that stupid insect. So here I go. I'm changing my torques. I'm changing my direction. I'm changing my speed. I'm moving in and out of those obstacles. I'm avoiding this. I'm seeing the openings, etc., etc. And all of that over variations in information detection, energy dissipation, proximity to the catch. That's an invariant. That's a deep invariant. You know, excuse me again. when I see people talk about which part of the brain does intentionality, I just wring my hands. The issue here is, what the hell is this word picking off scientifically? What is it picking off scientifically? We need to naturalize intentionality. All these creatures are exhibiting functional variability. They're all modifying means to get to ends. So this, right, this is the deepest symmetry we know of. This is the one that runs the universe. The age invariance is the biggest there is. So why would it not show up here? And why would it not show up in previously disguised forms? Because we actually don't bother to ask these questions, I think. We don't look at this creature and say, well, what's he doing? His intention is persisting, it's invariant over all these variations. That's where a group symmetry theorist steps in. He starts doing the hard work of discovering nature's symmetries and how they're being played out. What kind of science? Lawful basis for prospectivity, my last item. 2 slides and then 1 for the truth. So here's agency again. This is a wonderful problem, the outfielder problem. We've worried about this for a while. Do you have baseball teams in Florida? No. We have a few up north. Red Sox. Unfortunately, this is West Coast. Looks like where's actually in
It's Oakland Athletic.
Oakland. It's Oakland Athletic. I want to introduce the notion of proper organization, because what I'd like to do is the lawful basis for prospectivity. So agency. In order for me to adjust means to ends, that means my behavior has to be in relation to things that are upcoming. Retrospectivity means my current behavior has to be in relation to things that I've encountered. Now these two words, one is, one sits here as the kind of anticipation, one sits here as memory. But here we are again, scientists, we're trying to find out what those words tag in nature. So this person, does this person have to compute time and compute space? No, it turns out the solution, nature's solution is quite wonderful. There's an optical variable hinted at in 1968, discovered about 2000. If you hold this optical variable, which is the ball in its flight has a property of the acceleration of the closed optical contour on a optical solid angle to the eye, if it remains invariant, that is, if its velocity remains unchanged, then you will end up at the right place at the right time. You never compute time, you never compute space. So here's an ecological solution to a very hard problem. How many of them are there? And if we keep looking, excuse me again, if we keep looking into brain, what's the chances of you finding these things? What's the chances you'll find these things? The things that biological systems are taking advantage of. In 2001, the computer scientist Dubois proposed 2 theories or 2 ways of addressing anticipation. Weak anticipation is by models. Very common. The best exemplar, best theorist of that was a person from Scotland, Craik, a remarkable man. He helped actually build the first radar during World War II. He was a psychologist and mathematician. And he promoted the notion of internal models. Strong anticipation is by law. So this set includes all these kinds of phrases we use. I say, oh, I expect the following will be true, I predict something's going to happen, I guess that. And we try to build the science of anticipation around such terms. In this small set is the domain of strong anticipation. And here is one thing we know. It's become called as anticipatory synchronization. Look how recent, again, we're talking only about 11 years. You can have a master system. X dot is some function of x, and here's a slave, where y dot is a function of y, and here's a coupling term linking this to this. It has a delay term in it. What does this do for me? Well, what Voss and others have shown, both mathematically and in terms of physical systems and some biological systems, that if you set up this equation, then the master runs ahead of the slave, and at some point the slave is anticipating the master. That's what these equations give you. They give you anticipating synchronized. They're now synchronized. Now it's the slave who's ahead. Let's look at some simulations. And I'm going to play with coupling strength. Various simulations, so we can have a harmonic dynamic anticipating a chaotic dynamic. This is interesting. If you look here, I put this turn off all the lights. This is a very interesting building. I'm very impressed by the engineers of Florida Atlantic University. You'll notice a small error here, if you could see this clearly. The harmonic system has, as it were, misjudged the chaotic. And then, again, you see it's anticipating. This is the harmonic system. After we've set it up, it's running ahead of the chaotic master, the roster. And down below, the chaotic system, which has many, many time scales, is anticipating a harmonic oscillation. Let's do something serious with respect to this tool, this new tool we're getting. The possibility that one thing can become synchronized anticipatorily with respect to another. So there's some interesting problems. If I push you off the day-night cycle for a little bit, your particular homeostatic behaviors will become disturbed. If I look at your homeostatic behaviors just before you're waking up, then some of them are already kicking in. They all kick in, by the way, before you wake up. They start kicking in, and they kick in at different times. Different kind of chemistries, different kind of rhythms of this and that kind, and so on and so forth. You are terribly anticipatory in your homeostatic behavior of the light-dark cycle. So, here's an evolved synchrony. This is in the realm of plantine. Turn off the light-dark cycle, and the plant continues. This is when it was first observed, in plants. Oh my God, look at that. The plant is still opening its leaves and closing its leaves. And it's done. See, it's done. In the literature, it's treated as if this is exhibited by all creatures and goes on interminably. This is not true. I have no idea where this came from, but it seems to be treated as a uniform argument. This is a summary recently of all the literature. Long free runs, that's a free run, are not unusual, but they're not typical. They're not typical. If you look at that literature, sometimes you turn off the light-day cycle and the thing hops bifurcation, thumb, it's done. Other times you turn it off and the thing just travels along, and crash. Other times you turn it off and it goes, Name your variation, you can find it in the literature, across all 5 kingdoms. All 5 kingdoms. You can pick it up in a short time. This is my favorite. This is of the class Protoptista. This is Physarum. You know it as a slime mold. Slime mold. There are some creatures on the planet you should use as your benchmark about everything. The spider Portia, who is smaller than just on the tip of my thumb. Portia can do everything we've ever studied in cognitive science. If you really wish to get shocked about cognitive science, look up Portia la Bittiata. Look her up. She is amazing. I know she's talking about female. Portia. Look her up. She is absolutely amazing. 300 to 600,000 neurons. That's memory, anticipation. It can wander off for hours, knowing exactly what it's doing. Come back to the very site where it saw its prey, possible predator. Comes back behind it. Sees it here. So it's on the top of Kelso's head. Sees it. Portia looks. Portia goes off. Wanders through all the brush, through dead things on the floor, and comes here behind Kelso. Portia. So when you want to be shocked a little bit, just say to yourself, Portia and then Plasmodium. Physarum. Physarum can solve, by the way, I'm not being carried away, Physarum can solve problems in computer science. We are using Physarum to solve problems like the traveling salesman problem, which is NP
complete. MP hard problems. It does the Steiner tree problems. It's shown us 2 new solutions to Steiner tree problems. What you do is you put lumps of food on it. It's a protoplasmic thing. You put lumps of food on it, and then it gets itself organized into thermodynamic channels, and you look at the channels. So if you put 4 on, or 6 on, or 8, then it produces the minimal paths. It does the traveling salesman problem. It's a lump of protoplasm. No brain, no nervous system. Makes itself up as it's going along. Oh, anyway. Sorry, no, I'm not done, am I? This is, it's been a long day. So, this thing can learn the day-night cycle in this sense. So you put it into an environment where it's dry and then moist. Dry and moist. When it's dry, its speed drops. So the thing is moving. It's not really moving, it's spreading. And it spreads, the amoeba spread at some speed. So when it's dry, they move slowly. So that's where they were moving when it was moist. Moist, they go back. So now you've got the period you can create. Give them the period. Within a short time, they've got the period. They've got it. So you turn off this cycle, and there they are. They're into the cycle. This is an amoeba. Great big lump of jelly. It's got the cycle. And if you change, suppose you use different cycles, then it can show you that if you reinstate a cycle, right, you reinstate, it's back in immediately. Back in immediately. It has memory of the cycle it was in before. So you can mix the cycles up, 90s, 30s, 90 minutes, 30 minutes, 60 minutes, seconds, whatever. Go back. And it shows you, oh, I remember that cycle. Memory. Think of these words: anticipation, or prediction, memory. What is the piece of nature that they're tagging? I don't think it looks like the pieces that we have tagged thus far. When we finish here, you can do these simulations using the anticipatory synchronization equation set. This is the coupling exchange. When it's very high, hard coupling. I mean, this is like a force. You're being run by a force. Swift synchronization, abrupt loss. Medium coupling, slow synchronization, gradual loss. Soft coupling, very slow learning, but very prolonged. That's what they need here. The real literature are like this. Theory is the last slide, you'll like this. You've done very well. Particularly for those of you who are around all day. Theory of perception action for all organisms. What kind of science does it entail? In 2003, at a conference here, I made an argument based upon my concerns. I made an argument based on my concerns from a conference here in 1987. I'm like that creature who doesn't forget. So how about this? These are arguments that have been made so well at this center. The order parameter or collective variable zeta expresses a coherent relation among parts and processes. So when we're looking at these creatures from the 5-5, we can approach them through identifying their collective variables for their particular perception action phenomena they're displaying. And these collective variables express coherent relations among parts and processes. This is the genius of them. They're hard to find. If you want to see how hard they are to discover, look at physical systems called frustrated systems. These are physical systems that are made up of chemicals with all different preferences. Yet they reach a stable state. For the scientists, trying to understand what the collective variable is very hard. See, they're frustrated systems, because since they're so different, their local interactions have to be different. And they all must compromise. Remember the famous fins of von Holst. So here's these fish that he studied, the ones that began this center many years ago, if you will. Looking at fish, see the fins here, they're the same size, and this guy's smaller. It's like me, you're asking me to get these two to connect, right? This guy likes to do that, and this guy likes to do this. Suppose I let this one go this way. at nodes. So this is my coordination. It's not quite the one I like to do in isolation. And this one is certainly long away from what it likes to do. It likes to do something like that. So here I do it. So I'm compromising. There's some frustration there. I want to do this and I want to do that. So these systems, so-called frustrated systems, tell you how hard it is to get to those things. Being hard doesn't mean to say we don't do it. That's the nature of science. We try it. There are many micro, macro neuromechanical processes. This is an acting person. And here's this argument made by Scherner and Kelso. I call it the Scherner-Kelso conjecture. I like it a lot. The idea is to take all of the things I've been talking about and enfold them into the collective variable. Where are we heading? What kind of science are we going to need down the road for these systems to understand their behavior, their perception action? The action, and this word I like. I have only the remotest idea of what it means and how it's implemented. Action perception pattern evolves as a typical motion equation. This is the order parameter, and these are the control parameters that are either specific or not specific in their effects. Under this way of thinking, function entails components. Isn't this the problem with, if we will, with the stem cell? Someone give me the theory of the stem cell. The stem cell is puzzling. You take it and you stick it in those material things which generate the skeleton. And it says, oh, okay. And you take it and you stick it in those material things that generate its gut. And the stem cell says, okay. And you take it and stick it in those material things that give you your nervous system. The stem cell says, okay. So what kind of part do you want me to become? Why is stem cell logic hard for us? Why is it so hard? Because this is the entailment. This is impredicativity, where the function specifies the component. That's why I was raising questions today about you sort of step in and you see these things you can point to and you say they're the components. In a complex system, you have to remain agnostic. Knowing what the components are requires an entire technology. And the organization is more, it's not ordinary causal stuff. It's more like this is a support metaphor. All these laws are supporting perception action. There's no straightforward cause-effect argument. So, for the complex systems of brain sciences, which I will say have had 25 years of wonderful research, I hope I've given you something to worry about for the next 25 years. Thank you very much.
Sure, Dr. questions. Questions, please.
Eric, yes.
You make the argument, or you want to get rid of inferences as the basis of human action. Did I follow that correctly?
I would like to see, for example, the word inference not used in many domains. For example, right now, C. I don't want this room to be an inference. Yeah.
But what about other domains, the mental verbs that are sort of what cognitive psychologists want to say are the uniquely human aspects of the mind? Do you aim to get rid of inferences as a basis for them?
I must admit that I had a long and difficult time with language, even though I've worked on it and had grants on it for, someone pointed out here, for a long time, since about 1970. I tend to wear a couple of hats, and when I'm wearing the language hat, I am much more willing to use the very words that I'm trying to banish here. For just this reason. It's not so much, however, that I think that it won't be true in the long run. But at this point in time, I have not the slightest idea. But I'm willing to contend that we actually have very little idea about how to deal with language. And I'm pleased to see some of the sorts of changes that have come about, although none are too satisfactory, like the Ellman work, I think is maybe improved connectionist, in quotes, connectionist style modeling. I think we probably recognize that we are done with the kind of interpretations that were handed down from Chomsky onwards. I think our syntax theories remain a bit watery. But I'm with you on this one. I think at the moment I'm allowing some variant of inference. The question is, what might that be? And okay. That's it. Lucky man. No, my wife. Never bring your wife or husband to a conference. Yes.
So you admonish us against defining intelligence in terms of intelligence, but just why is that not impredicative? Defining a system in terms of itself. Could you just draw that distinction between the admonition against loads of intelligence and the championing of impredicativities?
So we typically don't use impredicative where x equals x. That's not impredicative. But we could. You're right. I mean, if we take a term like intelligence, she's got. So if I take a term like intelligence, then I'm allowed to define it by impredicative principles, by a set of things which could include intelligence. That could be it. But whatever it is, then it is obviously bound to these other matters. It's a good question. I would have to give it a thought. I do always do that. It's a good question. You have to give it a bit of thought.
Can you articulate for us the distinction between law and mechanism? That's to say, even in these frustrated systems, they seem to sort of violate general laws of phase transitions, for example, because there are specific mechanisms responsible for the effects. So an argument against this general approach is that it doesn't tell you about mechanism.
Except for maybe the roles of the laws of thermodynamics.
Well, that requires more explanation at this point, but feel free. Some would say, some of my physicist friends would say that a law at one level is just, there will be laws at lower levels that would be called mechanisms. An example of that might be quantum mechanics. We consider quantum mechanics a theory of physical systems.
Well, the issue really is the word cause. And we have failed to agree, I would say, scientifically and philosophically upon the interpretation of that, although we have many good ones that we can use. And we seem to use it in a way that basically looks like it works in most things. I mean, we certainly have done well with the kind of minimal causal language of the likes of, to go back some centuries, Galileo and Newton. But the issue at hand, I think, is that all the causes we look at. So here we go. Suppose I go to law. So laws say what's possible, but context says what would actually occur. And it's that fit between the laws and the context, the boundary conditions, the ancillary conditions, the constraints, those terms to use, that reveal or provide what actually happens. And maybe these arguments are for the deeper and better understanding of the context. So if we go back to the developmental experiments that I referred to, those things, clearly there are some tremendously superior kinds of legalities surrounding the development of an organism. But what we don't appreciate is just how multiple and subtle are the contextual conditions. They're necessary circumstances, necessary conditions which we don't pay any attention to. So we look at this, we know we can manipulate, maybe we can manipulate something genetic, and we see something take place. But there are many, many conditions sitting there which are being satisfied, whose names we do not know. That's why I gave you the twitching and the not seeing your feet. Those sorts of things. So maybe this is a moral argument for worrying about laws, but now incrementing our concern for context. I think in the domains of cognitive science, context may be the most important word of all. I was mentioning to the memory research we did earlier, I don't know if the person who did it, so it was just left. In the memory research we did, the neuroscientists still talk about trace decay, but most psychologists don't. Because most psychologists see forgetting retention literature is one about context. It's a matter of the context of original acquisition, context of the time of retrieval, etc., etc. And when you run experiments, you make those things about equal. Like take a hippocampal patient, we did hippocampus today, give them one of these incidental learnings where they just come in and read words off a screen, and then you bring them back 2 years later in the same room, in the same place, and you have them read those words and others which were not on the screen 2 years ago, and they read them faster. They read them faster. Their latency is shrinking. These are weird phenomena because it's like there's a principle of time translation symmetry, which you break by changing conditions. If you reinstate conditions, which is what I mentioned today, this is the arguments of the American memory theorists in the 30s and 40s, the functionists. So I think maybe much of what's being said here is concerned again with the concept of context taken seriously and formally expressed by tools that we can work with. Maybe these tools of non-well-founded set theory can begin to do that. That would be my best bet. Because I do like laws. Yeah.
So what do you then think we can do in science? It seems, we need to include context. I understand we probably need also to include time, like different time scales, retroactive and proactive. So can we only look at patterns now and regularities, or can we understand something? And if so, what is understanding?
Well, science is a bit like democracy. It's the best way of understanding nature. No, it's the worst way of understanding nature. It's better than anything else we have. I'm quoting Churchill apparently on his comments about democracy. And we stumble along. Most of it is stumbling along. And I think all a lecture like this is meant to do is to sort of make the stumbling in a bit more in this direction than that direction. And how do we deal with these matters? For example, your lecture today, you're opening up this whole question. So how do we step into such a system which has many space-time scales? And they're interlocked in interesting ways. And they may not be locked in any uniform way. That is to say, a scale at this length and time may not actually be affecting this particular short time scale, but is affecting this particular short time scale. We don't know these things. And tools are being developed, and I would say within the past half century we have made some, that's why we're here actually. Could you imagine having had this conference a half century ago? It's been pretty hard, right, on anything on complex systems. I think we went to the first brain, non-linear dynamics of the brain in 1982. First ever conference on the brain as a non-linear dynamical system. It was 1982. And how many complex system centers are there? Well, there are quite a few now, but in our youth, Armin Harry was a great 100-meter runner.
I'm not that far.
1960 Olympics, really. And Scott, these were not, these things didn't exist. So my point here is, while I'm making many comments about how I think things should be going, and some of them are actually being explored, I'm myself quite patient and conservative. I often think I'm one of the most conservative scientists. I think the alternative views are more radical. I think they're more stepping outside the ordinary domain of science. I see this being more continuous with the ordinary domains of science, rather than Rudyard Kipling stories, which I often see, often as causes for certain phenomena. But I'm saying I think once we get pointed, we can move. So once we began to understand that geometry could be not of Euclidean forms, but could be of these rather peculiar entities called fractal, then all of a sudden we saw that some of the many irregularities that confront us in science could in fact be addressed quantitatively. They were just different tools. And some of them had been hidden in mathematics for almost, say, Weierstrass functions, which had been sitting around and no one had known what to do with them. They were miserable, dirty, ugly. Not even functions, people said. And then all of a sudden you trot them out, and boom, look at this thing. It's exactly what we need for this problem. So someone was doing DFA today, DFA And DFA is based upon those functions. That's where those tools come from. So that's my attitude to these matters. We make our probes, we push, we nudge, kick the system over a little bit, and make sure we continue to build the tools that now will be appropriate to these issues. That's what I'd like to see. Once you point them out, I mean, think of where we are today, again, just using fractal as an example. Once Mr. Mandelbrot got on top of his oppressors, critics, and he still has critics, of course, right? Even when he, at his death, there were still people who were quite unhappy with the math he'd introduced into the world. That's been going on for ages. You know, everyone hated Riemann and Lobachevsky, all those miserable people. There's always been loads of miserable mathematicians that people hated, whose tools we then use long after they're dead. There are some people who never get rewarded until long after they're dead. I hope that's not true for any of you here. Okay, I think I'm done.